Welcome back to Good Law, Bad Law, another episode in a continuing look at some of the perhaps less obvious consequences of the coronavirus pandemic. And as we continue to isolate at home and be as safe as we can during this health crisis, there are vulnerable members of our society who are actually less safe during these times being at home. And that's what we're talking about today with my guest, Patty Dailey Lewis. She's the executive director of the Beau Biden Foundation, the focus of which is protecting children from harm, and in particular from a sexual and physical abuse in the home, and also from predators who target children through access to online apps and other ways in which they lure children into harm's way through the technology that children are spending more and more time on during the time now that they're shut in the home. So it is a disturbing phenomenon that so many millions of children are learning at home and spending time on their computers like never before, and are at risk from some of the most horrendous harms imaginable. Something we have to talk about, something we have to understand better, and something we have to become more educated about so that we can take better care of our children. So a really important episode of the podcast today with Patty Dailey Lewis of the Beau Biden Foundation. Everybody, please continue to be safe, be careful, take care of each other, and enjoy this next episode of Good Law, Bad Law. Today, we continue to focus on the coronavirus pandemic and the impact of the pandemic in a whole variety of ways that are perhaps a little less obvious than the most obvious impact, which, of course, is people getting sick and dying in horrendous numbers. And so today, I want to focus on the impact, particularly on children, and even more specifically, what looks to be a very worrisome rise in the incidence of child abuse and other perils that children face, with my guest today, who knows knows a great deal about this, Patty Dailey Lewis, who's the executive director of the Beau Biden Foundation. First of all, Patty, welcome, and thank you so much for being on Good Law, Bad Law to talk about this really important subject.
No, thank you for introducing this subject. I think it is a compelling issue. With everything that is going on, I understand why people are more focused on the actual health effects of COVID-19. My own brother, who lives in Philadelphia, and his wife have been stricken and quite sick. But
oh my gosh,
I also don't want people to think that all is well in happy little households throughout the nation. I am particularly concerned about children and their safety without any eyes that are usually there to watch over them having access.
Well, that's it exactly. I mean, obviously, in a happy and safe home, you could say there's probably no better place for a child, particularly a young child, to be. But in a home that isn't so safe for a child, the problems we're dealing with today only heighten those concerns. So that's what I think it's so important to talk about today. Maybe you could start, Patty, for those who don't know. Give us a little background on the Beau Biden Foundation, and weave in some of your own background as well, because you and I were chatting before, and it's, I think, very important for people to know that as well.
Okay, sure. So the Beau Biden Foundation was begun shortly after the death of then Delaware Attorney General Beau Biden. Beau Beau had dedicated his professional career both as Attorney General and as an Assistant United States Attorney to child protection. And he was running for governor when he passed away. And I will tell you, frankly, he had a plan. He had a plan for addressing the problems of child abuse. And this foundation was begun to carry on his mission, to carry out that plan in protecting children. And so we do a couple of different things. We do trainings. We do education for the community and professionals that work with children. And that's everything from police officers to doctors to nurses to people who work in youth-serving organizations. We work with children and make sure they are safe online, talking to them about, honest conversation about the stuff that's going on online with children. And we do some advocacy work. We work with around the country to make sure that we have the best laws to protect children. One of the things, and you and I were talking, I joined the Delaware Department of Justice in 1985, which everybody can quickly figure out that I'm an old lady now, but it's okay.
No. Not to me, you're not.
my students at the law school, so I've been teaching at Delaware Law School for 30 years. I just finished my 30th year there. I've been a lawyer for 35 years. The bulk of that time has been handling cases involving children and families, child abuse, neglect, domestic violence, juvenile delinquency, abuse of the elderly, and abuse of the infirm. And it was something that made Beau tick. So we are carrying on his mission. And I can tell you, I have some friends that are working from home during this crisis that are bored. And I tell them, I wish I were bored. We are so incredibly busy trying to make sure that people, A, understand what's going on, and B, perhaps most important, how to respond to it. So we created a training in the first week after quarantine called Virtual Learning Environments, and making sure that teachers and mentors were being trained on how to respond to abuse that they may observe virtually. Because a lot of people think that, unless I actually see the abuse with my eyes, it's not a mandatory report of child abuse. And in fact, we want to talk with folks about the fact that the reports to the child abuse hotline have plummeted. The most common reporters of child abuse were educators and the medical profession. And the fact of the matter is, children are not in school. Most schools that they participate in are virtual, which is great. But there's things we can look to in terms of a child's environment as well. Do you have a child who was outgoing and who was full of energy and loved to talk and is now sitting, sucking their thumb? I think a lot of people, Aaron, they just don't want to think about those kids that were being sexually abused every day by someone living in their home. And school was their safe place.
Yeah.
School was where they could go to get away with it, to get away from it. And now they can't get away at all. And so we know that 1 in 10 children is likely to be sexually abused. What are we doing for these children?
Right.
It is telling us their calls have shot up in terms of children seeking help, being victims of child sexual abuse. We know that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, who we've worked with since the Beau Biden Foundation started, is telling us calls to the cyber tip line are through the roof. Because we have so many children online. And, parents are busy doing their work online and supervising their kids online. And so when you see them sitting quietly playing something, are parents really making sure that that the children are safe? There's just so much stuff online.
Well, and before we dive into that even further, you mentioned a lot of groups that are very interested in this topic and need access to good information and training materials and education materials. The one group I didn't hear you mention is parents, and as parent, uh, and also as a lawyer, I mean, I see, all kinds of ways in which education is so vitally important. I spent some time on the website, and there's really fantastic information and access to resources on the website. I'd like you to give the link to the website. We'll do that again at the end, but for those listening, and I want to encourage you to go to the website and see some of the really good information and resources that are there. How can people get more information through the website, Patty?
Sure. On our website, you can go to www.Beau Biden Foundation, and that's Beau, B-E-A-U, Biden, B-I-D-E-N, Foundation.org. And we do, I should mention about what the work we love to do with parents, particularly what we have for parents on the website is very important. We have published 2 ebooks on keeping children safe, and I think the one that most parents are going to be interested in is called Online Predators, What You Need to Know to Protect Your Child Today. And we wrote that working with law enforcement to talk about the apps that kids are on and some of the real dangers to our children online. A lot of people think about online gaming and they don't realize that, these games that their 10 and 11-year-old kids are playing, they're not playing it with other 10 and 11-year-old kids. The average age of a gamer in the U.S. is 34 years old.
Wow.
And it is an open door for predators to go after prey. They know where the kids are. They're online.
Yeah.
They know what they're interested in because they're playing the same games. They know that at certain ages, our children, they want to necessarily, start to be a little more independent and pull away from us. And so these predators, they look for that. They know those kids are online, and they set up relationships with those children. I probably 3 weeks ago, I got a call from a woman who said she was so glad she had gone to one of our lectures because her son came to her and said, "Look at these pictures this guy sent me," and they were pornographic pictures. And he said, "I'm scared because he keeps asking me where I live."
Oh my God. Wow.
I don't know what to say. Can he find me anyway? So I think the child was really smart.
Yeah.
He gave the address of Troop 3 of the Delaware State Police, and that sent a very clear message. In fact, it was the last message he got.
Wow. Okay.
How smart, right?
That is really and courageous to come forward with that, because I'm sure there are many more stories where the child doesn't come forward, and even if something terrible doesn't happen, they just live with the fear and anxiety of that, and then of course there've got to be uh, far too many stories where something terrible does happen because of that kind of connection.
Yeah, and part of it is, honestly, Aaron, that a lot of children and their parents never talk about this before it happens. So if you don't talk about it with your kids before it happens, and then it happens, and they're then convinced by this predator through a grooming process that it's their fault, and they're afraid to tell you because what's your first reaction going to be? No more gaming. No more interacting with your friends, then they're kind of, they're between a rock and a hard place. So one of the things when we talk to parents, we talk about having these conversations before your kids get in this predicament so they know how to handle it. And so they know what your policy is. What as a parent do you want? And, we have to make sure that as parents, as hard as it is, that we don't immediately go to, ground zero blowing up, but to tell kids that no matter what they tell us, we're going to keep them safe. And that's our job.
Well, and before you can even have the conversation, you actually also have to become educated yourself as a parent.
Right.
I mean, there's a poster, but it has information as well, 15 apps that every parent should know about. I looked at the list when I was on the website earlier today, and I can tell you as a parent who does try to talk to his kids about these things and make sure there's conversation and open communication. There are apps I'd never heard of, and they're scary. They are meetup apps, and there's just seeing them and knowing that they exist. As a parent, as an adult, you can immediately see the danger, the potential danger in those for a child who isn't sophisticated or doesn't know, or may simply get into a situation where he or she is over their head, and
Right.
then they're in trouble and they don't know how to deal with it. So parents have to become educated about these things so they can have those kinds of communications with their kids.
Absolutely. Conversant in their language and letting kids know what they can expect. Because if we don't tell them that this could happen and it happens, they're going to be really shocked and they're not going to want to know what to do. So, recently we just did a blog piece on what a lot of people are calling parent shaming. I grew up in a very disciplined household. There were 8 of us, so there needed to be discipline.
Right.
But just know there's times to be to maintain calm when your children approach you, and if they're not afraid of telling you. One of the things I used to tell my daughter is, there's nothing you could ever tell me that won't make me love you. Even if sometimes I'm going to be angry because you violated a rule, you need to come to me. I'm the person you can trust to help.
So we're kind of taking these in the opposite order that I expected, but that's okay. So the online dangers. You mentioned a cyber reporting line. Tell me about that and how we know that over these last couple of months, as we've all been far more shut in than any of us would like, and especially kids, with parents working at home and distracted and maybe caring for someone who's sick, and having your child spend more time online may seem like uh, something that's just necessary in these times, because kids need something to do, and um, so it can seem like a good solution, even if it isn't how we would have our kids spend their time ordinarily. So there's certainly the opportunity for an increase in the risks and the dangers of online activity. In the worst case, predators looking to do a child harm. How do we know that indeed over these last 2 months this has become an even more serious concern, more cases, and how do people handle that and respond to that? What should people know, and what should people do about that?
So we participate in a weekly webinar with the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and the Cyber Tip Line. And we talk about the calls they've been getting. And they have gotten, I wanted to look this up real quick. I believe they said it was 106% increase in calls to the Cyber Tip Line about predators online. Whether it was in the early stages of child grooming, which is what predators do, making friends with kids before they move on to more things, or whether it was just people that were out and out sending them pornography or asking for pornography. And that is a terrifying number. When that many reports are coming in, and that's just the ones we know about, right? So that's the thing that frightens me the most.
So who's making those reports? Are these parents who are reporting?
Sometimes it's the parents. Sometimes it's children. Sometimes one person makes a complaint and the police start an investigation and they find more children that are involved in it. So what you're going to see is this increase while kids are home online. And part of the thing we ask parents to do is, besides talking to kids about this, is kind of use this rule, whether it's online or in your in your regular life, is that children's interactions with adults should be interruptible and observable. So when your children want to go out to into their bedroom with the laptop, that's a no-no. Now that's hard, right? When they're in school and you've got 3 kids and 4 rooms, so everybody has to be in school. But when they are not in a classroom environment, or even if they are, you should be walking through and observing what's going on. You should understand who's on there and what they're doing. There should be very clear policies and procedures from the school on what is permitted to be going on during the Zoom or other platform classroom. Mm-hmm. What are the rules and regulations around this? Are you sure that you don't have an adult trying to set up online or through text messaging a one-on-one relationship with your child? So making sure they remain engaged with the children when they're in the school environment on platforms, and making sure while the kids are generally using other platforms like YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or TikTok, that they are very clear with what's going on in these places.
Well, and this problem is, if the experience in my home is any indication, is a huge problem. That is, children, and I'm not just talking about very young children, but all the way up to teenagers who are at risk for a lot of these online predators and these sites, these meetup sites. So, I mean, in the old days, when computers were didn't come in such small packages, it was understood that computers would be used in some kind of public space within the home. But now with laptops and tablets and smartphones, you can take that in the bedroom and close the door, and a parent doesn't see their child or their teenager physically using their device. And what you frequently hear when you try to get access or even just find out what your child is doing is, hey, I have a right to privacy. What do you do? What do you tell parents in that situation?
Well, so I go back to square one, right? And that's having a conversation about this device when you give it to a child, whether it's a phone or a computer or a tablet. One of the things we recommend is that every parent have with their child a contract that covers the device. So everybody's clear on what's the purpose of the device, what can be done on the device, and what are the rules around it. Are there things you cannot do? And if you do them, what will the consequences be?
Yeah.
So kids know going into this, it's not something that we're ignoring. It's not that we don't understand what's going on. We're trying to protect them and help them in this maze that there are, millions of predators out there trolling online for kids. And that contract is a good thing because it lets kids know right up front. In terms of computers, it's harder than ever. We always used to say, like, computers always need to be in an open room, whether it be the kitchen or the family room, where people can go through and I can walk by and see what you're doing.
That sounds so quaint now.
Right? So quaint now, right? Because I've got 3 kids that are all on different Zoom classrooms. I can't have them all in the same room. I envy those people that only have one computer right now.
Right.
So, what do? You have to first make sure that you go over the rules with them, that you do walk in and out, you walk through, and you tell them, like, this device we are providing you. It is not your device. This is our device, and we're providing it to you. So I'm not, when it comes to 10-year-olds sending pictures of their private parts, I am not a big fan of privacy for children in that
Or
regard.
receiving them. Yeah. I mean, it
And
happens with.
I should be able to pick up this phone and look at it any time. It's in my name.
Yeah.
I'm paying the bill, and God forbid you do something and you start harassing somebody. Guess who they're coming after?
Yeah.
They're coming after me.
It's
So it's almost like an open. Parents need to make clear to children that this is a device we are providing you for both your convenience and ours, and for your educational enrichment. You don't own it.
well, and it's remarkable to me how many parents don't know and don't talk to their kids about these things and don't supervise what their kids are doing online. You kind of this kind of went by quickly, but I noted it, and it's pretty startling when you say there are millions of people out there who are potentially looking to do harm to a child online. Um, since you come from a law enforcement background, I mean, from the from the Delaware Attorney General's office or the Department of Justice, actually, um, how focused is law enforcement on this? Because just as it's harder for parents, I would think it's the pervasiveness of the access and the variety of ways that predators uh, can really literally get into the bedroom of a child.
Through
Um,
Zoom conferencing, through Zoom video conferencing,
yeah, or
someone can
through these.
hijack a presentation and show an explicit video of pornography involving an infant. That happened 2 weeks ago.
Mm,
So what law enforcement is faced with is this explosion of, it's a crime of motive and opportunity. The motive is there. Any child is part of the opportunity. And so many children are online that it makes they're easy prey. They're young. They don't, some of them, it's the first time they've been on these sites unmonitored, and the predators know that. And I think the best resource is to be armed with the facts, the statistics, and the knowledge of how to protect your kids. And that is to pay attention to what they're doing. And I know what you're saying, Erin. Like back when we went to restaurants, remember that? It seems so long ago. But you would go into a restaurant at 7 o'clock, 7:30 at night, and there'd be a bunch of kids, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, with tablets, sitting at
yeah,
the table playing with tablets. And it's really shocking that at that
yeah.
age, now a lot of parents are very good. They set the thing to Sesame Street and they hand it to the child, and that's that. But once your children become able, and they're smart, man, once they are able to navigate these computers, they're off to the races, and you have to work hard to keep up with them.
You mentioned too that one of the ways the foundation focuses its work is looking at the law, and are there ways the law needs to be improved? Uh, I assume both at the state and federal level. But given the pervasiveness of this technology now, and some of the dangers, and particularly now as things perhaps come even more sharply into focus in this sense, are there particular initiatives? Are there ways in which you think the law needs to be improved so that law enforcement has the tools they need to make a dent in this problem?
Well, I think that lawmakers need to understand the pervasiveness of this
Mm,
and what law enforcement is looking at. So I have friends that work on these internet crimes against children units, and they could arrest 10 people every single day. I
mhm.
mean, it's overwhelming. It's a tidal wave for them. So I think we need to make sure that our law enforcement gets the resources they need. They should have the best computers. They should have the best training. We should not have to worry about getting training for folks that are working on the ICAC units. And we always have. It's always been we're more worried about what's going on right in front of us, when the things that are happening to these children are horrific crimes. The other thing is that we need to make sure that both federal and state law enforcement are working together, that the FBI is working with the states in terms of internet crimes against children. And that, I know this is not a day and age for incarcerating people, but I have to tell you, this is a crime for me that, when you lure a child like this and you engage in sexual activity with a child, you're raping children.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're doing that online or whether you're doing that, on the streets. And somehow it has always been deemed something of less value or less importance, which is why I, for one, have always been a person that has argued vociferously for the imposition of strict sentences when it comes to people who molest children online.
Well, I can't agree more. I mean, I see this on the civil case, on the civil side, because I represent victims of these kinds of crimes civilly. And I mean, and I see some of the most horrific cases across my practice, but there is a special place in hell for the people who are committing these crimes. And I don't think there's anything more heartbreaking than when you come to see the lifelong impact that these types of crimes have on children.
Aaron, you are so correct. I worked on the Bradley case here in Delaware, which was a case where a pediatrician had sexually abused. In the criminal case, the indictments were, over 100 children. In the civil case, it was more than 1,000 children that we worked with. And we know that's not all.
Right.
And so firsthand, I got to witness and continue to witness the pain that these children suffer years later, and how it's not going away from them. And when it's been videotaped, it's never going away.
Right. Just knowing.
So we need to make sure that we do what we can do on the prevention end, which we have been very always in child abuse, very slow on the prevention end. And we need to do what we have to do to educate our children, because we don't do them any favors. We talk a lot about sexting too when we talk to children, and how this when we were kids, I don't know how old you are, but when I was a kid, we didn't have these tools to do this, right? So what are you going to draw a picture of yourself?
Right.
Take a picture, because you'd have to get a Polaroid and wait 15 minutes. But for these kids today, it's click, and 1,000 people have it in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And so talking to children honestly about the value of their personal space and their bodies, and why you don't take those pictures and send them, because when you press send, it's forever. You can never get it back. Right. It's like whack-a-mole. You cannot bring these pictures down. You cannot get them back. And that's a very hard concept for children to understand forever. That's one of the things we have to work on with children, that what seems to be innocent exchange of nude and semi-nude pictures can actually end up hurting them very, very badly. And that, how would they feel if a picture of mom like that when she was their age was out there somewhere? Well, they wouldn't be very happy with it. So let's talk about what happens when you take these pictures and you send them to, your 8th grade boyfriend who's going to be your husband someday. Like, it's not a rational thought. But if we don't ever tell them that, then they never learn it. And so that's why it comes right back to parents being super involved in this, and really look at our website, www.beaubidenfoundation.org, and we have great, like you said, we have great resources. These ebooks, sit down with the ebooks and talk about it with your kids. Send them to your kids and say, why don't you give this a read, and then we'll talk about it. Because if we don't talk about it with them, I tell you who will talk about it with them, and it's predators.
Right. Okay. Well, I think that's absolutely brilliant advice, and I hope people are listening, and I hope people will take that to heart. Let's talk about violence in the home. and what teachers and healthcare providers, because this is really counterintuitive. You would think that if you're talking about an increase in a problem, you would be pointing to an increase in reports of a problem, but you actually made the point that we have to worry about an increase in physical and sexual abuse of children in unsafe home environments because there are fewer eyes on these children. So there's actually fewer. There's less access to the type of observation of children that would lead to the reports of these problems taking place. So, what can you tell us about what you're becoming aware of over these last 2 months that everybody's been shut in that respect?
Well, one of the things we know is that reports to the child abuse hotlines around the states, around the U.S. and around the world, have gone down significantly. In the first month, they were down more than 50%. So I can tell you from personal experience on how these calls work. The year that Bradley was arrested, we had about 5,000 calls to the hotline in Delaware, the whole state. And then we went on a major education campaign where we went out and gave presentations to everybody from doctors and police officers and lawyers to teachers to parents. And we talked to them about what mandatory reporting of child abuse is. We educated them about what child abuse is. And we saw in a 10-year period the increase in reports go from 5,000 to over 20,000.
Wow.
It's not because there was an explosion of child abuse in Delaware. It was because people were educated to report.
Right.
So everybody's eyes were on this problem. And Delaware and 17 other states are broad mandatory reporting states. Everyone's a mandatory reporter. I wish everybody would think of themselves as a mandatory reporter. All of our eyes have to be on all of our children, making sure they are safe. So when we go into a situation like we're in now, the outside world doesn't have eyes on many children anymore. And so for families that were already in crisis with abuse, there's nobody to see what that child looks like on Monday morning. There's nobody to check and see if these children are eating or getting their medication. I mean, we did a training the other day for nurses, and one of them said, I am up at night thinking about these kids that I gave medicine to twice a day. Who is giving them their medicine? Is
a school nurse. Right.
Yeah. So we started doing these trainings with schools and youth serving organizations to say, look, to the extent you are interacting with children online, keep an eye out for those changes in children. Keep an eye out for what their living environments are like. You also have really a new class of people involved here. You now have people that were not actively involved in abuse, but the stress in their family has grown so much that it's either domestic violence being committed in front of children or children being the victims of violence with no way out, with no one to tell. So to that end, one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to reach out to what I call like the new eyes on children, which is delivery drivers, people who deliver the mail, neighbors. Like, I understand that for so many years, child abuse was just like domestic violence, because I've worked on both of them my whole career. It's that dirty little secret that's in the family.
Right. You're not
and a lot of people like to say, kids aren't abused. 9 out of 10 children that are sexually abused by someone they or their family knows. It's simple. It's a rare situation, a horrific situation, nevertheless, but rare when children are snatched off the street. The vast majority of abuse comes from the family and people that family knows. With physical abuse, 1 in 5 or 5 children will die today of child abuse in this country.
From physical child abuse, yeah.
From physical abuse, from being beaten to death. You've already seen multiple cases in Philadelphia since March. I think, when are we going to? I forget now. I remember being in Buffalo doing a training on March 13th.
That's the date that stands out for me too. Yeah, that's the date that I think about. Yeah.
So I think about that as the date, but like I see every day on the news, and not just what some people would tell me. Oh, you overreact, Patty. It's discipline. I'm talking dead, down, out abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Children beat to death, and there's no one to intervene.
Well,
and no one to help.
And you alluded to this before, Patty, when you said before this whole crisis, this public health crisis we're in the midst of now, so many homes in crisis, so many families in crisis. Add to that 30 plus million people who've lost their jobs in the last 6 weeks. People who are caring for a loved one who's sick. I mean, you mentioned,
and trying to care for their kids, and trying to get them educated, and wondering where their next meal has come from. I see the lines of people trying to get food. I see, when I go to the grocery store, the looks on their faces when there's, 1 pack of chicken. I mean, people are terrified, and they feel there's nowhere to go. So I'm here to tell you that these child abuse hotlines are staffed. And calling to get help for somebody is just that. You're not a tattletale. You're not trying to get them in trouble. You're getting help for people that need help. We had on a training last week, we had a teacher say, I had a Zoom with my 2nd grade class, and this one little boy was in the dark. And I said, Cameron, you need to turn on the lights, honey. Have your mommy turn on the lights. And he said, we're not allowed to turn on the lights when my mom and dad aren't here. So there was a 7-year-old with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and no parents, because they're first responders and they had to go to work.
Wow.
So by calling Child Protective Services, you're calling to get help for that family. And, making that call, it should never be looked at as, I need to conduct my own investigation. You don't need to conduct any investigation. It's a call for a service. And let me tell you, I guarantee you, because I know them and I've seen them out, they are out house to house working with families to get them what they need. And are there circumstances where children need to be removed? There absolutely are. And they're doing it. Mm-hmm. They're doing it.
Let me ask you something, Patty, that maybe at first blush seems to flip the issue on its head a little bit. I'm involved with a couple people in raising money for school children in Philadelphia who don't have a computer. And the reason is that we all know that the only way to continue to participate in learning, to participate in school, in your classes, is if you distance learn via a computer.
Right.
And there are many, many, many families, unfortunately, who don't have a computer, who can't afford one.
Right.
So if used responsibly, we've talked about some of the ways in which this technology can be used irresponsibly and even criminally. But if used responsibly, and in these times that we're in, absolutely essentially for kids to continue to get to participate in their education, how big an issue do you think it is that there are literally thousands and thousands of families where the child doesn't have access to this technology? I would think that those are families, just from the demographics, where there may be also concerns because if you've got the stress of not being able to afford a computer, there may be other stresses as well, financial and so forth,
Well, first of all, it's those
Right?
extra eyes on the kids, right? So that's the most, to me, apart from the educational aspect, the most
Exactly.
important thing is there's other eyes into the child's life now when they're able to appear on camera and participate in education. It is the bridge to safety, again, for so many children. And if we can help families get computers and service, so we have large areas in Delaware and in Maryland and Virginia where you cannot easily get service. Tons of people with
That
no
seems
internet
just
service at
incredible.
all.
I know it's
I mean,
true because I drive through some of those dead
I'm
zones,
telling you, we
but
have
it's
a home
remarkable.
down in Chesapeake City on the Elk River. It's maybe 2.5, 3 miles off the main road. I've had now the third satellite provider just to be able to get like average. My daughter would tell you it's average at best service,
Right, right.
right? It cost me $150 to have them come out, $180 a month. You have to put down a credit card so you can pay that 180. Now, you have no job, and now you are expected to pay for the computer itself and $180 a month in service.
Yeah,
That's an enormous, enormous burden to ask families to bear.
it sure
And,
is.
some people, some of us are very blessed. Some people are not. And I really become very concerned with what I see as the war on the poor. Like for people who don't have, they just keep slipping further and further down the chain. They don't have what they need to even survive, and they want to educate their children or ensure their children are educated, but they don't have the money to pay for that either.
Well,
It's not
and the government doesn't either. I mean, the
right.
city of Philadelphia, I know because I've been following it closely, recognized this problem, and they allocated funds to provide a certain number of very basic computers,
Yep.
but not enough. And as you point out, having the hardware isn't enough. If you just have a nice laptop, good for you, but you can't connect to anything unless you also have a service that you can use to connect that computer. So and that's an additional cost. So this is a big problem for small and large cities, um, municipal governments or city governments don't have the money for this. For not certainly not for everybody.
No.
So that's going to continue to be a big problem, it seems.
And if we can't feed people, like what's the hierarchy of what folks need? And I think if everybody could say, like, I can afford to help with this, like this organization that you're working with, if you can help people to, this is why I'm a terrible fundraiser for the Beau Biden Foundation. If you can
I don't
afford to
believe you,
help,
Patty.
if
I
you
don't
can
believe that.
afford to help people help children,
Yeah.
whether that is giving them access to education, making sure they have the information they need. I just think people don't realize in the end how much is going to come back to benefit our society, to make sure children are educated.
Well, this is grim, but on the other hand, inspiring and encouraging that you and the Beau Biden Foundation are on this and have so much to offer people who forget about want to know more, need to know more about this, and help others to know more about this problem. If you want to know more about how to help uh, provide basic computers to school children whose families can't afford them, my email is up on the podcast website. You can get in touch with me. I'll be happy to give you info on how to help. And if you want more information on the subjects we've been talking about today, um, the perils children face online now more than ever, and the problems of physical and sexual abuse of children in the home during these already strained and frankly scary times. Please, everyone, go check out the Beau Biden Foundation. Patty Dailey Lewis, the executive director there. Again, the website is beaubidenfoundation.org. We'll also put a link to that in the description for this episode, which we will have up very soon. Patty, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on this. So enlightening. There's a huge problem, but there are things that can be done about it, and everybody needs to be a part of that. So,
and thank you, Aaron. Thanks for putting a spotlight on this and for all the good work you do for children and families, because it's more than you'll ever know. When we protect children and we save them from a life of abuse, I can't tell you how much it means at the end of the day for people that are able to get what they need to not just live, but to thrive. And that's Absolutely. What's important for our children. So thank you very much, and thanks for having us.
And please convey our best wishes to your family. I hope they have a speedy recovery.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks again. Patty Dailey Lewis, the executive director at the Beau Biden Foundation. Thanks so much for helping and for speaking with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Bye-bye.